Sonic Gems Collection is yet another Sonic compilation title released for the Nintendo GameCube and PlayStation 2, but today we'll only be looking at the GameCube version. Anyways, the collection consists of 3 games, as it markets itself, alongside 6 others from the Game Gear library. The games included are Sonic CD, Sonic R, Sonic the Fighters, Game Gear's Sonic 2, Game Gear's Sonic Spinball, Sonic Triple Trouble, Sonic Drift 2, Tails Sky Patrol, and Tails Adventures. I must immediately say, why Game Gear games? Many of these had Master System equivalents with better resolutions for home gaming. The Game Gear version of Sonic 2 had a Master System equivalent, as well as Sonic Spinballs, even Sonic Chaos, which was actually made in tandem to the Game Gear. Porting the portables to a home console just doesn't make any sense with vastly superior versions being readily available. That, and virtually every Game Gear emulator advertises itself first on the Master System emulation because the two systems were not too dissimilar from each other. The Game Gear was in fact a more powerful system that came out later, but they were built in accommodation for a smaller screen. There would have certainly been little to no challenge bringing the Master System alternatives to the Gems collection. This is a serious oversight. The other titles never saw the Master System, so that's perfectly understandable, albeit most of them now have converted ROMs out there to play on the Master System, though that's totally out of this ballpark. Just a side note, if anything. So, on Sonic Gems, the games play as you might expect, quite similar to their console counterparts. In Sonic CD, I came across a couple issues that I felt might not be present in the original hardware, usually collision bugs, but never anything severe and could usually be broken back into in a mere moment. The contrast change underwater doesn't appear, but I actually prefer this. Otherwise, I think Sonic CD played quite well in this collection, so with that, let's head into Sonic R. Sonic R is an odd game that I don't really like, but how does it play on the Gems collection? Well, as far as I can tell, it plays flawlessly. No frame drops, no weird graphical bugs. If you actually want to play Sonic R, then this is a totally viable way to do so. I know Sonic R was originally some sort of racing game, but really, think of this for a second. How odd is it in concept to turn a racing game, just a racing game, you know, with cars, into a Sonic game, replacing the cars with Sonic characters? It's an odd concept, and yeah, it exists, and this is it. Sonic the Fighters is the 3rd primary game in the collection. There is some clipping on the eyelids for characters at times, but otherwise I think this port was pretty much flawless. So now it's time to take a look at those Game Gear titles. You're able to use save states for these at any point in time, which will certainly come in handy for the first one listed here. Sonic the Hedgehog 2, or, as I like to call it, yeah, you keep telling yourself that. Sonic 2 on the Game Gear I always considered to be just terrible, but not so bad on the Master System. It's a painfully difficult game on the Game Gear because of the small screen. This game has many obstacles and entities falling from here or there that if you can't see, you'll just get in the way of. Unlike other Sonic games, you're able to pick up a single-digit number of rings after being hit despite how many you're carrying. And to top that off, they fly off so quickly that it's hard to grab them again once they've fled. As any Sonic fan would know, no rings is a sure sign of impending doom. Don't get me started on the first boss, because there are actually no rings to be found on the stage, at least as far as the simpler observer can tell. The boss involves bouncing bombs, a slope, and some giant Venus flytrap thing. You have to avoid the randomly arranged bomb patterns on a tiny screen that often underestimated just how high the bombs will go. It's an absolute mess. Following that level introduces a paraglider, which was the primary gimmick for the game. It's very difficult to control and you'll die a lot. In addition, for some reason, you're unable to use the spin dash like the original Sonic 2 on Mega Drive. I can't help but wonder if this is some kind of prequel or something? Anyways, that's Sonic the Hedgehog 2 Die a Lot Edition. I'd say skip over this one in preference for the Master System if you can, if you're so inclined. I'd have greatly preferred Sonic the Hedgehog 1 on the Master System, which was, by the way, also on the Game Gear, so just why on earth Sonic 2 was included instead is beyond me. Sonic Spinball on the Game Gear. It's a bit different in level design, and the great twangy sound font from the original is of course missing, but the graphics are actually pretty dang sweet for the hardware. It's really not too far off from the original in that manner. It's not bad, but besides that, there isn't really that much to say about it. The remaining 4 titles are Game Gear exclusives. Sonic Triple Trouble is akin to any other traditional 2D Sonic game, and introduces Knack to the gaming universe, who was afterwards changed to Fang with the name being a bit too similar to Knuckles. Sonic Drift 2 was the first American introduction to Sonic's short-lived racing series, being a massive improvement over the first game. Tails Sky Patrol and Tails Adventures are the last 2, which features the lovable secondary character Tails in a very unfamiliar format, the first of which is a bit of a shoot-'em-up, having Tails fly through auto-scrolling levels with a big ring used to destroy foes and collect items. It's certainly unique and I think it's worth checking out, despite being a bit rough on the controls, but that's an issue with the original release. Tails Adventures is a pseudo-platformer RPG-style game where the classic Sonic formula certainly isn't. Far from a bad thing, in fact this game is yet again fairly unique. In a few ways, it reminds me of what Nintendo did with Captain Toad on the Wii U a couple years back. It makes me wonder why Sega didn't try more things with this rather underappreciated character. All 6 Game Gear games played flawlessly, considering the emulation at hand, but again, I must say this isn't how they were meant to be played, at least, not on a television. Not only that, but some of them I wouldn't have a reason to play on the big screen. Sonic Drift 2, while a lot better than the first, holds no priority over other similar games on my GameCube. It's more of a curiosity piece, really. The same goes for Sonic Spinball, and I wonder why this even made it on here. I'd much rather play the real Sonic Spinball. You could admit the player might not have access to the original, but is it wrong to assume this compilation was directed at previous Sonic Mega Collection owners, to make up for the lack of Sonic CD in that compilation? At that point, you'd have both releases of Sonic Spinball, which you just don't really need. Why they didn't replace it with any of the other Sonic Game Gear games is beyond me, and yes, there are more Game Gear Sonic games than this. I know this because of my first real introduction to the Game Gear library through the Hat Games Play Pal plug-and-play. It, doesn't have the most ergonomic design, but it has a great lineup of games on it. It's how I was introduced to Psycho Fox, which I think speaks enough on its own. But nevertheless, it introduced me to Sonic Blast, and even the Game Gear version of Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, which is okay in comparison. Okay, so just as Sonic Spinball, this wouldn't serve much of a purpose on the collection, but Sonic Blast could have at least shown up. It's generally considered a pretty mediocre game, but it's still a 2D Sonic platformer. You could have even given them Sonic Labyrinth, maybe not that one. But I still sit here and question the lack of the Game Gear's Sonic the Hedgehog 1, more importantly why Sonic Spinball got the priority treatment instead. To me, it just doesn't make sense. Alas, it is what it is, and there are other ways to play these games if you're really raring to play them. Back then, though, that wasn't the case, so the selection is certainly confusing, to put it lightly. Oh yeah, I guess I should talk about the 2 unlockable Vector Man games. It's just a good-looking 16-bit game with lots of impressive sprite work. I think what I find most confusing is what it's doing in this collection. It just doesn't fit here. In Sonic Mega Collection, you'd get games like Rystar and Flicky, which were at least semi-related. Rystar was another attempt at a Sega mascot. Vector Man was a later entry into the Mega Drive lineup, which I would say had no affiliation with Sonic at all besides being on the same platform. I also feel obligated to mention the extras, which is much less exciting this time around. In fact, most of them are just rips from the PC Sonic screensaver package in the 90s. It even states as such. Overall, the Sonic Gems collection does what it needs to do to make sales, but doesn't try anything to go beyond that. I mean, besides Sonic CD, which I actually don't like, but don't hold me against it. This is otherwise a collection of mediocre games. The point of the collection is to bring attention to the more obscure Sonic games. Look, I get that. But what I don't get is that a number of genuinely good obscure Sonic games never get acknowledged by Sega anymore. There's also Sega Sonic the Hedgehog. Try to find Sega acknowledging that one past Sonic Mania, which was of course only thanks to Christian Whitehead. I know Knuckles Chaotix isn't a game many would admit is very good, but it's still one of those Sonic enigmas that I think most fans have yet to try out. That would have been cool to see in this collection. And what about Sonic N-Gage Advance for the Nokia N-Gage? No, I'm only kidding. I'd say if you're looking for a way to play the games contained within this collection, this isn't a bad choice. The games run well, they play like they should besides a few minor bugs that aren't even worth mentioning. So in that aspect, you can't really go wrong with the Sonic Gems collection. What you would get wrong is picking it up for the purpose of the Game Gear titles, at least for those already on the Master System. Come on, Sega, you can do better than this.
The place to be.